You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast, where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, I am doing a mini lightning round of questions. So I'm answering 3 questions from listeners. I'm trying to get through these quickly, and I know sometimes you all are waiting. So I'm going to try to do some mini lightning rounds so you don't have to listen for an hour, but I can still get multiple questions done at a time. So we're going to hear questions from Melanie from Iowa, Cindy from California, Julia from California. Thank you for your questions. However, a few housekeeping things before I get into questions and answers. First of all, I have a huge congratulations to my most recent round of 6-figure play therapist graduates. We last week graduated 8 therapists from all over the world, and I'm just so excited for them. I hope that you are excited with me for them. It makes me feel really happy to know that there are really solid rock star child-centered play therapists entering into the world to do work and do the work that we have to do with kids and in the way that makes the most sense for kids. So my Aussies, Joss, Clay, and Cindy, so happy for you all on the other side of the world. And then my Americans, Andy, Tracy, Julie, Colleen, and Sarah, huge congratulations to the 8 of you. And it's just been such a fun year with you all. So I'm so happy, and hopefully we will see each other very soon in all kinds of capacities. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. All right. Secondly, huge thank you to all of you who have been sending me gifts. I want to actually share with you a couple of things that I've gotten because it's just been so fun. So I don't know, a lot of you may know that tiramisu is my favorite dessert. I think I've mentioned that a couple times. And so I got a gift card to an Italian restaurant that we have in the States called Maggiano's, and they have the absolute best tiramisu. So I cannot wait to get a whole bunch of tiramisu from there. So huge thank you to my girls that got me that. And then I don't know, if you all are not from Australia, you may have no idea what's going on with the whole Vegemite thing. Although if you know the Men at Work song where she's just smiled and gave him a Vegemite sandwich, that might be your reference to Vegemite. However, I got like an all things Australia box this week, and it had a little stuffed koala and soap made from Manuka honey. Related aside, I'm kind of a honey aficionado, and it's one of like the few sweet things that I eat, and I love honey, and I'm like really, really into unique honeys. And Manuka honey is one of my all-time favorite honeys. And I know that it only grows in New Zealand, and I know it's like this specialty thing. That's why it costs a fortune, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so I got I got soap made from Manuka honey. I got Vegemite, which I'm going to talk about in a second. I got a little stuffed koala, super cute. I got a tea towel full of all kinds of Australian slang. So that was really helpful because I heard my Aussies say up whoop whoop, and I was like, what in the world is that? Apparently that's like in the middle of nowhere. So for us, we say like, oh yeah, out there in podunk. That's the American Southern slang. So, you know, in the middle of nowhere is up whoop whoop in Australia. So I'm learning all kinds of those phrases. Anyway, Vegemite, let me get back to this. So I've heard of it in Land Down Under, right? The Men at Work song. And you smell it, and it smells kind of sweet. It kind of smelled like prunes. And I mean, I'm not a huge prunes fan, but prunes aren't bad. So I was like, oh, it kind of smells like prunes. And I just took a fork and stuck it in there and put a whole wad in my mouth. Y'all, Vegemite is not good on a fork. I'm just going to tell you right now. Wow, I was not prepared. And then, of course, my Australians are like, yeah, it's best in really small doses. I only like it on toast, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, yeah, I didn't know what I was supposed to do with that. But look, I can say that I have been exposed to Vegemite, which makes me happy. And I'm glad that I tried it. I might give it a go on bread just to see, because I've been told that's the best way to eat it. But off of a fork, 10 out of 10 people do not recommend. Okay. that was that was my excitement for the week. Anyway, moral of the story is congrats to all my graduates. Thank you so much for my gifts. I always love when I get little surprises, so that made me very happy this week. So for all of you that sent me stuff, I really appreciate it. Thank you for the cards and the emails as well. I know that y'all extend yourselves a lot to me, and you really don't know how much that means to me. I woke up this morning and there were 2 emails in my inbox just talking about how the podcast has helped them so much and thanking me and filling me in on, where they listen and what they've learned and all of that. So y'all, seriously, it means a lot. I just want you to know that. Okay. Third and final housekeeping before we move on. I mentioned in the last episode that you all need to make plans to go to Atlanta in October for the APT conference, and I'm trying to get a vendor booth there. So we are planning all kinds of things, meetups and dinners and podcast people and coaching people and collective people, and it's just going to be awesome. And yes, there may be merchandise that's related to CCPT. Eric's working on some options. So I don't know, bumper stickers, hats, keychains, we'll see. Anyway, however, in new and recent development news, in November, you probably are going to have to plan and decide. So Atlanta in October, APT conference. If you all have a travel love, if you all want to go to the other side of the world, or those of you that are on the other side of the world, just know that I am presenting in Australia in November for the Play Therapy conference there in Queensland. So to all of my Aussies, I am so excited to come to you, and I cannot wait to meet you all in person. And for those of you that may want to go to Australia, that's not a hard sell. It's like living in Florida. Like, who has a hard time visiting Florida? So if you want to go to Australia, know that you can go to a Play Therapy conference in November, which is their spring, so I've been told. So lovely weather. And end of November, right before Thanksgiving. So you'll be off work anyway. This is just working out for you all. So end of November for Play Therapy conference in Australia. If you are able to go, I would love to have you. But all of my Aussies and New Zealanders, I can't wait. I'm coming to the land down under. All right, back to questions. Thanks for indulging my housekeeping. This is why I love podcasting, y'all. I feel like I just get to sit and chit chat with you. Like I'm, hanging out with my friends. This is fun. All right, so let's get into questions. So Cindy where are you from, Cindy? California. I'm going to read her question and then I'll share some thoughts. So she says she's been a children's therapist for over 30 years, and the CCPT model in the podcast has renewed vigor and practice. I'm so happy to hear that, Cindy. All right, so here's the question. So for parents who say, y'all, how many times have we heard this? For parents who say, well, if kids under age 12 aren't cognitive or rational, then why is it that they can learn reading, writing, and math? Why can't they learn the skills to cope? And then she puts in parentheses, they mean CBT. Right. The age-old question. Why can't they just play by themselves and figure this out? Why can't they just learn how to control themselves? They can learn in school. What's the difference? All right, Cindy, thank you so much for that question. That's actually really helpful. So let's dive in. First, and maybe most importantly, academics are very formulaic, and it is academic learning. A child's brain is wired to soak everything up like a sponge. So of course a child can learn to read. There's a formula to it. Of course a child can learn to do math. There's a formula to it. Of course they can learn to write. There's a formula to it. It's academic, and it is something that they are able to follow a system and implement it, which is the polar opposite of everything else in their world. Everything else in their world is emotional. And there is no formula. There is no structure. For a child, they are here and now. They're emotional. They're driven by the moment. So when they get upset, the feeling overwhelms them, and that's all they can respond to. There's no formula for understanding your feelings. An emotional vocabulary helps you understand your feelings. Increasing your emotional IQ helps you understand your feelings, but it isn't something that you just sit down and have someone teach you and have an academic approach to it. So I think the huge distinct difference is that emotions are not linear. They're not concrete. They're not black and white. And kids' experiences are 100% emotional until abstract reasoning develops around 13. So I think that's the very first and most important distinction. My second thought is I'm going to actually throw in another question that's related to this that people have asked me. Well, if they're not cognitive and they're not rational, then when you set limits and when you give choices, they're obviously using their brains. So that doesn't make sense. If you're giving them limits and giving them choices and they have to think through those options and they choose their outcome, that is very clearly cognitive. And if they're not cognitive, then that doesn't make sense. Well, and actually my husband and I had that conversation, like when our son, maybe even before he was born, and then when our son was young. That was one of Eric's main points of confusion about the CCPT model was if you're giving kids limits and giving kids choices, those are cognitive. So how can you say that they're not cognitive? And it took me a really long time because I would answer the question and he would go, that doesn't make sense. And then I would answer the question a different way and he would say, that doesn't make sense. And my answers were always experiential. Like I would explain in the playroom, well, in the playroom when, blah, blah, blah. And he would go, yeah, but that still doesn't answer the question. So I finally got to a point where I was able to articulate it in a way that he was like, okay, I understand that now. So I think this will also be helpful for your question, Cindy. When a child is making a choice, when a child is complying with a limit, let's be very clear that if they are under 13, it is a conditioned emotional response to a scenario that would normally require cognitive process. And let me explain what I mean by that. When you give a child a choice, you can choose, let's say ultimate choice, because that would be a little bit more appropriate here. So if you choose not to finish your dinner, you choose not to have dessert tonight. If you choose to finish your dinner, you choose to have dessert tonight. Which do you choose? Okay. So early on, in that moment when the child says, this dinner's gross, I don't want to eat anymore, I'm not eating one more bite, they are emotionally reactive, and therefore their choice to not finish their dinner aligns with their emotional reactivity. That's not cognitive. It's 100% emotional. I don't like this. I don't want to eat it. End of story. Emotional. But what happens when they have also then chosen not to have dessert? They have an emotional reaction to not having dessert too. They hate the fact that they didn't get dessert. They're so upset. They cry, they beg, they plead. They're overwhelmed with disappointment. They're overwhelmed with anger that you are so mean that you won't let me have dessert, right? Also an emotional response. So here's what happens. It becomes a conditioned emotional response. Next time, very same ultimate choice is provided. The child goes, oh, yeah, I hated not having dessert last time. Never mind, it's not worth it. I'll just finish my dinner. They choose the lesser of the pain of the emotion. There's an age-old adage. Wow, that's hard to say. There's an age-old adage that says people will change when the pain of change is less than the pain of things staying the same. Okay, so if things stayed the same and it was miserable not having dessert, then never mind, I'll just eat because that's not as bad as not having dessert. It's still 100% emotional. They've just been conditioned by which emotion was worse to deal with. Same thing with limit setting. You really want to go see your friends right now, but it's time for dinner. You can choose to see your friends after dinner, or you can choose to see your friends tomorrow. Which do you choose? Which of these choices is going to make me feel the best? Or conversely, which of these choices is going to make me feel the least bad? They're both bad. I want to see my friend right now. But which of these is going to make me feel the least bad? Okay, notice that this is still all emotional. So we do not understand what is happening through the child-centered play therapy approach with they are cognitively processing anything. No, they're not. They're experientially and emotionally processing everything. All right. And then finally, Well, if kids under 12 aren't cognitive or rational, why is it that they can learn reading, writing, and math? Why can't they learn skills to cope? They do learn skills to cope. That's exactly what the playroom affords them. They learn coping. They learn resilience. They learn problem solving. They learn to build self-esteem. That's exactly what they're doing in the playroom. But it's through the context of the relationship with you. Because you're serving as the therapeutic guide rails for everything that's happening as they're navigating this path that they're on. And without the therapeutic guide rail, namely the child-centered play therapist, they flounder. They drive in reverse. They do donuts in the middle of the road. They have no idea where they're going, why they're going there, how they're supposed to get there. They flounder. And the relationship provides the safety and the security so that they know that they can get where they want to go. So do they learn the coping skills? 100%. But they don't do it alone. That's the very important distinction. And that's why child-centered play therapy is so special, because the relationship is at the crux of everything we do. All right, Cindy, so I hope that's helpful. I'm glad that you sent that question in. That was something that I think will benefit a lot of people, so I appreciate that. All right, so now we're moving on to Melanie, not her actual name. She asked to remain anonymous, but Melanie from Iowa. And question here, this is actually a little bit of a longer question, so I will condense and kind of give you the Cliff's Notes, if you will. She says that she's been working with a child for around 6 months, and she's been steadily applying and refining the skills that have been discussed in the podcast. And in the past, she had not been fully child-centered. So she's been working really hard to be congruent in the playroom and also in communication with parents. So congrats on that. I almost just said your real name, Melanie. I'm gonna be really careful. So thank you for being honest and vulnerable about that, and just really trying to work to change your practice. That's a big shift, and it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of work. So I hope that you feel very proud of that. Okay, so the actual question. It means I've realized that I've made many mistakes with this specific child. I did not correct her mom one day when her mom told her not to destroy my playroom anymore. I often allowed her to explore the entire therapy building, leaving the playroom, and we acted as spies. I did not set a limit to stay in the playroom. A final example that comes to mind is something would break or spill, and I did not have the language to say, "You're looking at me," or watching my reaction to see if that was okay. I'm worried because I initially did not know the right way to handle situations or know the correct limits. And then our therapy seemed like more of a fun outlet for her than a therapeutic process. She started play therapy due to parents' report of aggressive play. And my question is it too late for this child for play therapy with me to be effective now that I have a better handle on things? How do I hold conviction in the efficacy of play therapy if I know I've made mistakes and created confusion? Do I continue to believe that this child is just continuing to work through what she needs and that her timeline looks different from the parents? Also, how do you separate between a child who may have ADHD versus a child who is playing out the need for control and creates chaos? And then she added another email came in that said, basically, I'm asking if it's too late for this to be effective, mainly because the parent reports she has seen no improvement in the aggression. This makes me feel that we aren't making or can't make progress. All right, Melanie, thank you. Let me just share an overarching thought before I dive into some specifics. This is something that I've had a conversation with probably 60 or so therapists at this point in all of the various arenas in which I'm interacting with counselors, because inevitably we start out doing one thing and then we find CCPT. It's very, very rare. Let me put it this way. I'm the outlier. I know that. It's very rare for people to have only ever been child-centered their whole career and having started there, been very, very solidly grounded in theory from day one. It's like, the albino unicorn, right? Like, it does not exist. So almost everyone at some point has a massive shift and goes, okay, I'm all in. But that means that sometimes midway through clients, you're making the transition to wholly CCPT and you hadn't been before. So I have this conversation all the time. Well, what about with these kids that I started directive or I started eclectic or I didn't really understand CCPT well? Can I do this? How do I make this work, et cetera, et cetera. So Melanie, this is something that everyone struggles with. And I'm really pleased that this question came in because I think this will be really helpful. Okay. Number one, whenever we make a change, and this is universal, all CCPT, right? When we make a change, if the playroom is different, if something has been moved in the playroom, if we're going to not see the child the next week for whatever reason, if whatever happens that is different or a change, we want to make sure that we directly discuss that with the child. When we start the termination process, that's a change. We bring that up. If we're going to take a break for Christmas or for spring break or for whatever, spring break is like the Easter week off of school in the States. We let kids know. Why? Because we want them to know what to expect and we want to eliminate confusion. So Melanie, you're going to outwardly, if you haven't already, you're going to outwardly say to this little girl, I wanted to tell you something. I know when we started that I used to talk to you a little bit differently and we used to do things a little bit differently than we have been lately. I've been learning different ways to do my job. And I wanted you to know that some of the things that I did early on, I'm not doing those anymore. So when you're here, you're completely in charge. And when you're here, all of our playtime is spent in the playroom. And when you're here, sometimes accidents happen. Now, obviously, you're not going to go through every single one of these. I'm just, when these opportunities present themselves, when an accident happens in the playroom, when something spills, you actually address it. You know, I know things like that have happened before, and I never actually said this phrase to you, but I want you to know that sometimes accidents happen. I didn't say that before, but I should have. You just address it. Get rid of the elephant in the room. So whenever something comes up that is different and you recognize that it might be confusing for the child without an explanation, you just do a very short admission of what used to be and what is now. That's extremely important. So I know we typically meet every week, but next week we're going to take a week off because I'm going to be on an airplane. You know, that would be for like a really little kid. And then I'm going on vacation for an older child, right? So you get it out in the conversation. This not only makes sure that the child knows what to expect and there are no surprises, it also gives the child the opportunity to ask questions or process it, or talk about it, or share a feeling. So by introducing it, you give the child permission and opportunity to deal with it in whatever way they need to. That's very, very important. Okay, so to answer your question, Melanie, is it too late? End quote. No, never. All right, this is my little pep talk for the moment. For all of you that have switched your alignment, adherence, right? Not that you weren't CCPT before, but you were a Frankenstein version of it probably. I don't mean that in a mean way. It's just we incorporate all these different things and think that it's child-centered. And when you finally realize what child-centered truly looks like, you're like, whoa, I was not doing child-centered, right? So whatever your Frankenstein to CCPT approach was before, and you've said, okay, you know what? No, I am wholly in. I'm going to adhere and I'm going to make sure that I am only child-centered moving forward. Okay, when that happens, it means that what happened before is kind of like reset. So what I mean by that is, however many sessions you had, does the rapport and the relationship still exist? Yes, but it has to shift. Does the work that took place still there? Is it still there? And does it still have meaning? Yes, but it has to shift. So everything that happened leading up to the I'm all in on child-centered, it still was valuable. It still was helpful, but it was kind of like the 1.0. And then 2.0 is when the CCPT relationship is formed, when the CCPT skills are used, when the CCPT outcomes are observed. So does it take longer than if you would have started from day one CCPT all in? Yes. Because there's a reset that has to take place. There's essentially we have to rebuild momentum. We have to reestablish what this is like. We have to get comfortable in this new approach to what we're doing together. It doesn't dismiss or devalue what's already happened, but it certainly kind of has to get back on the track and get some momentum built again. So does it mean that it takes a little bit longer and it's a little bit slower? Yes. But it doesn't mean that it won't work. CCPT works. We know this. So as soon as you're all in, then the sooner the child will make the gains that we're hoping for. And then my final thought, Melanie, is essentially what is going on. So the why matters. All my staff at the center keep telling me they're going to make the why matters bumper stickers. Every time I say it now, it's all I think about is people driving around with hashtag the why matters on the back of their cars. So the why matters. It's really, really important for you to keep in mind the child has to figure out how to trust you. And don't beat yourself up about that. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel ashamed. Don't feel like you royally screwed something up. That's not what you should feel, and that's not what I'm trying to make you feel. But the point is, CCPT is predicated on relationship and trust and safety and security. And when things have felt confusing, and when things have felt unpredictable, and when things have felt ungrounded in theory, it's hard to establish those things for a child. But as soon as you're all in, it's easy to establish trust and relationship. So what happens is the child kind of has to go, okay, maybe now I can trust this. Now I can trust the therapist. Now I can trust this process. Now I can trust the work that I need to do. Okay, now we have the relationship that feels safe and secure enough that I can do this work. The why is the trust and the relationship has to be there. And when we are clinically and theoretically all over the place, the child can't trust us and they can't form an effective relationship with us. It's too hard. They never know what to expect. They never know what's predictable. They never know what's steady. They never know what's stable. It's too hard. So I hope that that's helpful, Melanie. And thank you so much for writing. I think that's going to be really, really beneficial for a lot of people. All right, final question. Oh man, you might get out in a 30-minute one. This is exciting. All right, Julia from California. Oh gosh, I talk about this all the time, so I'm glad that this came in too. I have a few kids that will say, "Don't look at me," or "Don't talk" in sessions. I want to respect their request while also showing them that I'm still engaged. How might you handle this, and what's your interpretation of why this may be happening? We just talked about this a little bit on the collective call last week, which I find so fascinating because this is something that I think we all not only deal with, of course, but then sometimes it's like, well, what am I supposed to do? So let's tease this apart a little bit. So why do I think this may be happening, Julia? Power and control. It's very difficult for a child to come into an environment where the relationship is totally different, the rules are totally different, the expectations are totally different, and everything they know about the world gets turned on its head in a child-centered playroom. That gives kids authoritative, dictatorial power and control if they need or want it. They don't get to boss anybody around. They don't get to order anyone around. They don't get to dictate things that happen with anyone, anywhere in their lives. So if they realize that they have the freedom to do that in the playroom, and that's one of their issues and one of their needs, they're going to capitalize. So don't look at me and don't talk to me. It's very much power and control. Now, it's not necessarily rooted in power and control, though. Often it's rooted in the child's discomfort of hearing what their experiences are. In other words, when we're reflectively responding, when we're completely present and attuned and engaged, when we're reflecting content back to them, when we're reflecting feelings back to them, it makes everything very real and very personal. And sometimes kids are very uncomfortable with that. I don't know how I feel about you being this engaged and this aware of my deepest, darkest stuff. And I certainly don't like you saying it out loud, because then I have to hear it and I have to interpret it and I have to receive it. I'm experiencing it in my play, but when you say it, it takes it to a whole other level. So often they're avoiding the discomfort or it doesn't settle well with them sensations that they're experiencing. And then also another potential Sometimes they're unwilling, or often they're unable to receive it. So even when it's fully on target, even when it's very accurate to their experiences, because often what will happen is when we reflect a feeling and they go, stop doing that, or don't talk to me, we might go, oh, maybe I totally was off base with that. Maybe that wasn't what they were feeling at all. And we second guess our response. Don't do that. That's usually not what's going on. It's usually they're unwilling or they're unable to receive it. It's very, very hard for a child to hear things about themselves when they've never had a sense of identity, when they have no emotional vocabulary, when they have no sense of their externalizing behavior as it relates to their internalized feelings. When someone says it out loud to them, it is very, very tricky for them to navigate often. So there's a power and control thing, there's a discomfort, and then there's an unwilling or unable component. It's just too personal for them to receive. All right, so Julia, what do we do with this, right? So I want to respect their request while also showing them that I'm still engaged. Okay, well, first of all, we can't do our jobs. This is what we talked about in the collective. We can't do our jobs if we're quiet. So I've had therapists that said, well, I thought I was being child-centered. They told me not to talk, so I didn't talk. Don't go down that rabbit trail, y'all. Yikes. So we cannot do our jobs unless we are using the skills. That is child-centeredness. It's reflectively responding, tracking behavior, reflecting content, reflecting feelings, using the 4 pillars, using our phrases, right? We have very specific skills that are implemented in sessions and they serve a purpose. So we can't be quiet and think that child-centered play therapy is taking place. Therefore, when a child tells us not to talk, don't tell me how I feel, don't say what I'm doing, don't look at me, don't whatever, we immediately reflect back to them that they are feeling something about that. So, you're upset that I'm saying those things to you. You're frustrated that I acknowledged that you knocked the tower over. Okay, we still do our job. Now they might go, I told you not to talk. Oh, you really don't want me to talk. So then we back off of the emotion and we go to content. We're going to ramp back the intensity of our response until they can manage it. So we're going to reflect a feeling. That's probably not what they want you to do, but it's still our job to do so. Well, then when they bristle at that, then you go to reflection of content. If they still bristle at that, then you go to more of an empathic grunt. Oh, no talking. All right, but you've still made a comment. The goal is get to a point where you're doing it in such a way and the length and the tone is aligned enough that the child will receive it. So what that looks like is you either will slow down the pace of your responses. So if you were responding every 5 seconds before, you might go to every 10 or 15 seconds. Or you might slow the pace of your speaking down. So you talk a little bit more slowly. See if they can handle that. Or you take the decibel of your voice down. So you go almost to a whisper. Oh, you don't want me to talk. And notice that you can actually probably get away with that because you're no longer talking, you're whispering. Really subtle workaround there. Wink. So you have to learn the ninja tricks, y'all. Like to do this job, you have to figure out all kinds of little strategies and tricks. So, I said don't talk. Oh, well, I was whispering. Workaround. All right. But the point is, you have to get it back to a point where the child will let you do it. And here's what happens. You keep trying. So even if you go through all of that ramping down and they still say, I said don't say one more thing. Then you go, oh. And then you wait. And then you give it maybe 20, 25 seconds. And then you whisper the smallest little thing and see if they don't yell at you. See if they don't react. And then if they don't, then you keep at that level. So every 25 or so seconds, you whisper something really quick. But you're still going to verbally engage. We do not sit there silently. And then one last thought. When something like that happens, it's really important to explain why you're doing what you're doing to a child. Not clinically and theoretically, but you want them to have an understanding of what you're doing. So when they go, I don't want you to tell me what I'm doing. That's so annoying. When you're tracking behavior, right? So then you go, oh, you don't like it that I was mentioning that you were stacking the blocks, but I wanted you to know that I was paying attention and that's what I saw you were doing. Same thing with reflecting content. Oh, you don't like it when I say the same thing, but I wanted to make sure you knew that that's what I heard you say. With reflecting feeling, you wish that I would not tell you what I noticed that you feel, but I thought that's how you felt and I wanted to make sure you knew that. They need to understand that there's a purpose behind it, because otherwise it's just weird. No one in their life talks to them that way. So it feels awkward and uncomfortable, but then often it's threatening because it's so deep. So we have to be really intentional about giving them the explanation, as well as reflecting back to them what's going on in that moment for them. So we either reflect their content or we reflect their feeling, and then we say, but that's the way I let you know that I saw how you felt. That's the way I make sure that I understood what was happening. And there's the why. They may not like the skill still, but they at least understand it better and it's not so weird and vague to them. All right. So Melanie, Cindy, Julia, thank you so much for the questions. I hope that was beneficial to all of you. I'm always grateful for the fact that you write in and chat with me. Brenna at the Kid Counselor is the way to email me. And you can also call in 813-812-5525 if you'd like to leave a message for a question, and I can listen that way. All right, y'all. Have a lovely rest of your week and great weekend. I'm grateful for each and every one of you. We'll talk again soon. Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.